The headset breathes in a thin, cold rhythm. Microphone hiss. A voice, steady, small, says two words you can almost miss if you blink. Tower, do you copy? Static flares like distant snow. The voice fragments. Valley, black, instruments. Then the last sound, a hard, empty silence. The frequency goes dead. Do you feel that? The air seems to tilt and listen back.
Find a dark room, put your headphones on, and lean in. I'm Samnang. This is Nature's Dread, where beauty meets terror. Tonight's story is called Dead Air Tower, the night the radios went quiet. Listen closely now. Before that silence, there was Thomas Hale, 42, bush pilot, the sort of person who knew the land by muscle memory and weather watch. He'd grown up with wind maps and compass scars. His Cessna had more patchwork than paint. It smelled like coffee, engine oil, and the wool of long, lonely nights. People relied on him to move across the valley when roads refused to be roads, and they relied on the tower, what locals simply called the mast, to stitch the valley together after dark.
The mast stood on a rise where frost liked to gather. It was nothing cinematic, just lattice steel, a stack of antennas, a little concrete shack with a ledger on a shelf. Pilots keyed in call signs, rangers reported fires, farmers checked frost warnings. It was community infrastructure, a microphone you could point at the world and hear it answer back.
At first, the problem felt like a nuisance. Routine traffic began to bloom into overlapping static, brief, annoying, then vanishing. A late August night, a farmer's voice said there was a tone on his speaker that sounded like a bell underwater. He thought it was equipment. The next week, a rangeland ranger mentioned hearing his own voice delayed, like an echo that arrived after the thought. Probably the mountain, he said. That's what people do. They explain the thing away. But even then, some of the regulars started to sketch maps of dead spots on the back of envelopes.
Those envelopes mattered. They mapped wrongness. In the weeks before Thomas's last flight, the logbooks at the mast recorded short outages, each only minutes, each stirring odd hours. Radio technicians came and tuned, replaced parts, ran spectral scans. They found nothing obvious, no big solar storm, no obvious hardware failure. One night shift tech told me about a garbled call that couldn't be triangulated, voices that sounded close and far at the same time. It was like chasing a shadow over the radio, he said. We heard someone, but we couldn't find them.
Radio is physics and patience. There's interference, RFI, multipath reflections that bend a signal back on itself, dead zones where terrain eats transmissions. I spoke to an engineer who explained this in plain terms. Signals can fold over mountains, collide, and cancel. Sometimes silence is a natural result of phase cancellation, where two waves meet and, poof, zero. But even the engineer paused when I asked about a pattern that repeated at night. Nature can make things strange, he said, but repeating patterns, those ask questions.
On a cold winter evening, Thomas was finishing a ferry run. It was the kind of day where breath fogs the cockpit and instruments glow like small moons. He checked in, routine, and the mast answered. Then, a few minutes later, a voice rose through the static, fragmented, urgent, something about a valley, something about instruments failing. The words were sparse. Can't, airspeed, black, tower. He asked for coordinates. The reply was a ragged string of tone, a shriek of carrier wave, and then silence dropped on the channel like a curtain. And Thomas turned his nose into that silence.
This is the part people argue about. The logbook shows Thomas keyed his mic at 22:14 and answered a call. His last recording position on flight follow was an approach toward a low valley corridor tucked between ridges. Witnesses said they saw his landing lights for a moment, 2 faint stars moving low, and then nothing. Radios at the mast showed a spike and a crash. Search and rescue teams launched into a night that smelled of diesel and pine, and a wind that didn't blow but leaned in.
The search teams are a quiet sort of courage. I spoke with the SAR leader who coordinated the first sweep. He described the protocols when comms fail, grid searches, beacon checks, survival assumptions. They went in with thermal imagers and the sort of optimism born of training. They found a few of Thomas's flight tools, broken twine, the pattern of a landing skid in the snow that stopped short. No aircraft, no body. It's the sort of result that leaves a community suspended between grief and 1,000 questions. What we know from the mask's ledger and the tech interviews is this. There were short, repeatable outages, at least one night where a call could not be localized, and a fracture in trust. The archivist in town showed me decades of maintenance notes, times the mast was repaired, times the community petitioned for upgrades. There's a pattern of deferred maintenance and budget lists. The tower was both lifeline and afterthought. People trusted it because it was all they had, and that trust can become a hazard when silence arrives.
So why fly toward a broken signal? People like Thomas are wired to answer. Pilots respond to calls because someone might be alive. It's a raw, practiced good sense. He could have circled, called base, waited, but the voice on the frequency was in pieces, and someone in the valley, maybe real, maybe a ghost of interference, had asked. This is where things change, the decision that thinly slices the plausible from the tragic.
The last approach, reconstructed from instrument pings, radio logs, and the sparse human notes of people who were awake, plays like this. Engine note, a map of lights, a pilot calling for direction, static that climbs like frost, a tone that makes instruments droop, cockpit breaths, measured, then harder, faster. The world narrows to the windshield and the glow of a valley rim. Coordinates stop updating. The radio becomes a throat that can no longer speak. It feels in the retelling like the very air thickening until it does not carry sound the way it used to.
Here I slow down. I don't invent what the instruments didn't record. I place the listener in the cockpit using the evidence we do have. The sudden static crescendo, the loss of navigation fixes, the micro-entries in the log that trail off. The search teams found the skid, found small scattered items, and a radio handset tuned to the mast's frequency with no signal. They found emptiness where a person should have been. This emptiness is not only physical, it becomes a presence that hangs over the valley and in the mast's ledger.
Technically, there are hypotheses. Phase cancellation can create pockets of silence. Localized atmospheric ducting and nighttime temperature inversions can bend and trap radio waves. A faulty antenna tuning could create a null that swallows a narrow band of frequency. The engineer I spoke with was careful. He labeled much of this plausible and nothing as absolute. He emphasized redundancy, transponders, GPS, ELTs that usually save lives. He also admitted the impossible. Nature, combined with equipment, does uncooperative things sometimes.
But the human side resists tidy explanation. Thomas's sister kept a set of his last radio checks in a shoebox. She told me he loved that mast in a way people love steady things. It was dependable, boring, eternal. After he disappeared, the town held a meeting. People argued about funding and design and whether to add a secondary repeater. The mast's ledger, once a dry record, became a kind of confession. Notes in different hands, the same awkward, stunned language at the end of each log entry. We heard it. We couldn't find it.
Months later, they upgraded the tower. They added redundant systems and better maintenance schedules. They taught pilots new protocols for night calls and emphasized survival kit checks. Those are the practical ripples, how a community responds when the technology that ties them together falters. Yet some things a new antenna can't fix. The way a valley holds a silence, the private dread of answering a channel and finding nothing on the other end.
In the end, the record is stubbornly partial. Investigators closed several possible explanations without complete certainty. The family never received full answers. The mast's logs end and begin with small human notes, a new technician's name, a coffee stain, a pencil doodle. The community went on. People still fly, still farm, still call the tower when the night's thick. But the story didn't leave them untouched. It left a caution that silence can be engineered, or it can be a different kind of voice altogether.
And then, on a dawn a few winters after the disappearance, someone walking past the mast reported a single inexplicable burst signal, an old weather call sign that answered no one. The air was cold enough to make breath hold. Antenna wires moved, but there was no wind. The burst lasted less than a second, and then the night folded back into ordinary sound. People looked at one another and said the same slow thing. The night remembers.
If you're still here, if the story stayed with you, that's the point we step back from the valley and consider what silence asks of us. Do we fill it with more technology, more caution? Do we answer every call because failing to do so could cost a life? Or do we accept that sometimes the world makes patterns we cannot resolve? I don't pretend to have the final answer. I only offer the ledger, the interviews, and the small facts that gather like bones. Thank you for listening to this deep look at a place where community, technology, and the natural world collided. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who listens in the dark. And if you fly or live where radio is your lifeline, check your redundancies, survival beacons, extra batteries, procedures. Practical preparedness is not a cure-all, but it is a choice we can make. I'm Sam Nang. Nature's dread lives where beauty and terror walk together. Until next time, check the corners.